If my driver hadn't taken a different route that night, I probably wouldn't be here telling this story. I would have unlocked my front door, stepped into the darkness of my quiet house, and walked straight into a situation I might never have escaped. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 62 years old, and this happened in Los Angeles. 6 months before everything changed, I lost my husband, Michael. We had spent nearly 4 decades together. He was a high school teacher who loved history, and I worked as an administrative assistant for most of my adult life. We weren't wealthy, but we had built a comfortable life through patience, sacrifice, and hard work. Then illness took him faster than either of us expected. The hospital bills consumed most of our savings. The insurance payout helped, but not enough. By the time the funeral was over and the debts were paid, very little remained. Grief is expensive in ways people rarely talk about. At an age when many of my friends were planning retirement, I found myself searching for work again. I moved back into an aging bungalow on the east side of the city, a home Michael and I had purchased decades earlier when the neighborhood looked very different. The paint was fading, the fence leaned slightly to one side, and the silence inside those walls felt heavier with each passing week. My daughter lived several states away. We spoke occasionally, but distance has a way of becoming larger after loss. Loneliness became my new routine. To keep up with expenses, I accepted a night position at a private document storage facility in downtown Los Angeles. The company managed sensitive legal records, archived files, and confidential case materials. My responsibilities were simple but important. I reviewed records, verified documentation, tracked inventory, and reported discrepancies whenever something didn't match. The work required attention to detail. It also required trust. Most nights passed quietly. Rows of filing shelves stretched endlessly through climate-controlled rooms. The building remained almost silent, except for the hum of ventilation systems and the occasional footsteps of security staff. Was my night off, I worked alone most evenings. At first, I appreciated the solitude. Then I began noticing things. Small inconsistencies, missing paperwork, documents that seemed slightly altered, files that appeared complete on a computer screen but didn't match the originals stored in the archive. Nothing major. Nothing alarming. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I logged each discrepancy and moved on. But with every passing week, the number of irregularities increased. And somewhere beyond those walls, someone was paying close attention to the questions I was asking. At the time, I had no idea. I thought my biggest challenge was surviving grief and paying my bills. I didn't realize that a stranger had already started watching my routine. And before long, one unexpected ride home would reveal a secret far more dangerous than anything hidden inside those records. What I didn't know was that the person who would eventually save my life had already noticed the danger long before I did, and he was about to become the most important stranger I would ever meet. For the first few months at the archive, getting home was a challenge of its own. My shift ended close to midnight, long after most public transportation routes had stopped running. At first, I relied on buses, but schedule changes made that impossible. Walking alone through downtown Los Angeles after midnight wasn't something I felt comfortable doing anymore. Reluctantly, I downloaded a rideshare app. That's how I met Ryan. The first time he picked me up, I barely paid attention to him. He drove a dark gray sedan, looked to be in his early 50s, and greeted me with a simple nod. "Long night?" he asked. I gave a tired smile. "Aren't they all?" He chuckled softly and pulled away from the curb. That 12-minute ride home should have been forgettable. Instead, it became the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Over the next several weeks, Ryan seemed to appear almost every night. Same car, same calm demeanor, same quiet professionalism. Unlike many drivers, he never forced conversation. If I wanted silence, he respected it. If I felt like talking, he listened. And he listened better than most people I had known. As winter approached, loneliness made those short rides increasingly meaningful. Some nights, they were the only conversations I had all day. Eventually, I started bringing a travel mug of tea with me for the ride home. One particularly cold evening, I brought an extra cup. "You don't have to do that," Ryan said when I handed it forward. "I know," I replied. "But long nights are easier with company." He accepted it with a grateful smile. After that, it became a tradition. Chamomile, peppermint, ginger tea, small gestures that slowly turned a stranger into someone I trusted. Over time, I learned pieces of his story. Years earlier, he had worked as a building maintenance supervisor until a workplace accident injured his back. The injury ended his career, forcing him to find another way to earn a living. Driving nights paid the bills, but there was another reason he preferred it. "The city tells the truth after midnight," he once said. "What does that mean?" I asked. He glanced at me through the mirror. "During the day, everyone wears a mask. At night, people get tired. They stop pretending." At the time, I thought it was an interesting observation. Later, I would realize how seriously he meant it. Because Ryan noticed things, tiny things, things most people ignored. He remembered which nights I worked late. He noticed when my porch light wasn't working properly. He remembered the exact spot where my gate always stuck. And one evening, as we turned onto my street, he slowed the car unexpectedly. "What is it?" I asked. Ryan looked through the windshield. "Probably nothing." "What?" "That blue sedan across the street." I followed his gaze. The car looked ordinary enough. "Have you seen it before?" I asked. He nodded. "3 times this week." I laughed nervously. "Maybe it belongs to someone nearby. Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. Neither of us said another word as I walked to my front door. What I didn't know was that Ryan had already started paying attention to more than just the blue sedan. Because during his night shifts, he had been hearing conversations from passengers that didn't make sense. Conversations about missing records, missing money, and a woman asking questions she shouldn't be asking. At that point, I still believed the strange car was a coincidence. I had no idea that someone already knew my name, my address, and exactly what time I came home every night. By January, my life had settled into a routine. Every night, I left the archive building at the same time. Every night, Ryan waited outside in the same spot. And every night, we made the same 12-minute drive through streets that felt emptier than ever after midnight. For a while, those rides became the most predictable part of my day. But looking back now, I realized the warning signs had already started appearing. I just wasn't paying attention. One Tuesday evening, I stayed late reviewing several archived settlement files. The discrepancies I'd been documenting were becoming harder to explain. Small amounts of money had vanished from multiple cases. Nothing large enough to immediately trigger alarms. Just enough to go unnoticed by people who weren't looking closely. When I mentioned it during the ride home, Ryan listened carefully. "Does your supervisor know?" he asked. "Yes, and she thinks it's probably an internal mistake." Ryan didn't respond immediately. The silence felt different this time. Finally, he said, "People usually don't get nervous over mistakes." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Someone keeps correcting the records after you find problems, right?" I stared at him. "How did you know that?" He shrugged. "Just a guess." But something about his expression suggested it wasn't a guess at all. A few nights later, another strange thing happened. As we turned onto my street, I noticed a man standing beneath a flickering street lamp near the corner, middle-aged. Dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low over his face. He appeared to be scrolling through his phone. At least, that's what I assumed. When our headlights passed over him, he briefly looked up. For a moment, our eyes met. Then he immediately looked away. "See him?" Ryan asked. "Yes, that's the same guy." A chill moved through me. "The one from last week?" Ryan nodded. "4th time." I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Los Angeles was full of people walking at odd hours. The city never really slept. Still, I found myself checking the locks twice before going to bed. A few days later, I discovered my front gate, standing partially open when I returned home. I was almost certain I had locked it before leaving. The latch was old, so I blamed the wind. Then something else happened. A small notepad disappeared from my kitchen counter. It wasn't valuable, just a collection of reminders, grocery lists, phone numbers, and occasional work notes. I searched the entire house. Nothing. When I mentioned it to Ryan the following evening, he became unusually serious. "Did it contain anything related to work?" "Not really." "Not really?" I hesitated. There were a few file reference numbers. His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. That reaction unsettled me more than anything else. For the rest of the ride, neither of us spoke. As I stepped out of the car, Ryan rolled down his window. "Evelyn." I turned back. "If anything else feels strange, I want you to tell me immediately." I forced a smile. "You're starting to sound paranoid." He didn't smile back. "No," he said quietly. "I think someone else is being very careful." That night, I barely slept. And while I lay awake convincing myself I was imagining things, someone was already watching my house from across the street. Someone who knew exactly where I worked. Someone who knew my schedule. And someone who believed I was becoming a problem. The next night, Ryan would make a decision that seemed completely unreasonable at the time. But that decision would ultimately save my life. The following Friday started like every other workday. I arrived at the archive shortly before sunset, reviewed incoming records, and spent most of the evening double-checking settlement files that had already raised concerns. The more I looked, the less comfortable I felt. Documents had been altered, dates didn't match, approval signatures appeared in places they shouldn't. Someone was changing records after they were officially archived. The evidence wasn't dramatic enough to prove fraud, but it was enough to convince me that something wasn't right. By the end of my shift, I was mentally exhausted. All I wanted was to get home, make a cup of tea, and forget about work for a few hours. Outside, a light rain had started falling. The city glistened beneath streetlights as I climbed into Ryan's car. "Rough night?" he asked. "Worse than usual." He nodded. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The windshield wipers moved steadily back and forth while traffic drifted through the wet streets. Everything felt normal, until it wasn't. As we approached the intersection where Ryan normally turned toward my neighborhood, he drove straight through it. At first, I thought he simply wasn't paying attention. "Ryan," I said gently, "you missed the turn." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I know." Something in his voice immediately made my stomach tighten. The car continued forward, past another block, then another. "Ryan?" He didn't answer. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The silence inside the vehicle suddenly felt unbearable. Finally, he exhaled. "Evelyn, I need you to stay calm." Fear instantly rushed through me. "What is happening?" "We need to talk somewhere private." The seriousness in his voice terrified me. "You're scaring me." "I know. Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." My heart pounded. Every warning people ever gave about getting into cars with strangers flashed through my mind. Yet deep down, I didn't believe Ryan was the danger. The danger was whatever had caused him to miss that turn. 10 minutes later, he pulled into an empty office complex. The buildings were dark. The parking lot was deserted. Rainwater shimmered beneath a flickering security light. Ryan parked the car and turned off the engine. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he turned toward me. His expression looked more serious than I had ever seen. "Evelyn, I need you to listen carefully." The fear in my chest grew heavier. "What is it?" For a moment, he seemed unsure how to begin. Then he reached for his phone. "Over the last month, I've been driving the same passenger several times a week." I frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" Ryan looked directly into my eyes. "Because he keeps talking about you." The world seemed to stop. My pulse thundered in my ears. "What?" "He knows your work schedule." I stared at him. "He knows your street." The rain suddenly sounded louder. "He knows when you're usually home." Every muscle in my body froze. But Ryan wasn't finished. Because what he told me next was far worse than someone simply knowing my name. As Ryan unlocked a folder full of notes on his phone, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had been studying my life for weeks, and tonight they were planning to make their move. My hands trembled as Ryan unlocked his phone. Rain continued tapping against the roof of the car, while the empty parking lot stretched around us like a dark ocean. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me the phone. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Read the notes." The screen was filled with dates, locations, and short observations. At first, they seemed random. Then I saw my street name. My stomach dropped. A few lines below that was my work address. Then another entry. "Female, archive employee. Usually leaves between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. My throat went dry. "What is this?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Notes I've been taking after rides." I looked up. "Why?" "Because the passenger kept mentioning the same woman." I already knew the answer before I asked. "Me?" Ryan nodded. A cold wave of fear moved through my chest. The notes continued. "Works late, lives alone, house usually empty during specific hours, front gate sticks when opened." I stared at the screen. The details were too specific, too personal. Whoever this man was, he wasn't guessing. He knew things only someone watching closely could know. "Who is he?" I whispered. Ryan leaned back in his seat. "His name is Victor Hale." The name meant nothing to me. I've never heard of him. That doesn't mean he hasn't heard of you. I felt sick. Ryan took the phone back and opened another file. At first I thought he was drunk and talking nonsense. What changed? You. I frowned. What do you mean? He kept bringing you up. Ryan scrolled through dozens of entries, different dates, different rides, same topic. The woman at the archive, the woman asking questions, the woman checking records, the woman causing problems. Each entry made my heart beat faster. Problems for who? I asked. Ryan shook his head. I don't know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he opened something else, an audio recording. My stomach tightened immediately. You recorded him? After the fourth ride, the recording began. A man's voice filled the car, slurred slightly, angry, frustrated. At first, the conversation sounded ordinary. Then I heard my street name. My pulse instantly accelerated. A few seconds later, I heard my first name, then my workplace, then something even worse. If she keeps digging, the voice said, she'll find things that should stay buried. The recording ended. The silence afterward felt crushing. I couldn't breathe properly. He said that? Ryan nodded. There's more. I didn't want there to be more. But there was. Ryan opened another recording. This time the voice sounded calmer, more focused, more dangerous. She thinks she's helping people, the man laughed. She doesn't understand what's really happening. I felt physically ill. Because whoever Victor was, he wasn't speaking like a stranger. He was speaking like someone who had been watching me for a very long time. Then Ryan showed me one final note. It had been written only 2 days earlier. The words were short, simple, terrifying. Friday might be the best opportunity. Tonight was Friday. I slowly looked at Ryan. Neither of us needed to explain what we were both thinking. Someone had been tracking my movements. Someone knew my routine. And someone had chosen tonight for a reason. But the most frightening discovery was still waiting for me. Because Ryan hadn't yet told me what he saw outside my house less than an hour earlier. When Ryan finally revealed what happened near my front door, that night, I realized I hadn't narrowly avoided a bad situation. I had narrowly escaped a trap that was already being set for me. I stared at Ryan, waiting for him to tell me I had misunderstood something, that there was a simple explanation, that this Victor Hale was confused, that none of this was actually about me. Instead, Ryan opened another note on his phone. His expression told me the truth before he even spoke. There is something else you need to know. A knot formed in my stomach. What? Ryan hesitated. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely unsettled. Before I picked you up tonight, I drove past your street. My heart skipped a beat. Why? Because Victor mentioned tonight again during his last ride. The air seemed to leave my lungs. And? Ryan looked down briefly, then back at me. His car was parked across from your house. I felt a chill race through my entire body. What? I recognized it immediately. My mouth went dry. Maybe he was visiting someone. Even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded. Ryan slowly shook his head. I thought about that too. The silence stretched between us. Then he continued. I parked a block away and watched. Every word made my chest tighter. What happened? Ryan exhaled heavily. I saw Victor get out of the car. I could barely breathe. He crossed the street. The rain outside seemed louder now. He walked straight toward your property. A wave of nausea hit me. My hands began trembling uncontrollably. No. Ryan nodded grimly. I watched him open your front gate. The world suddenly felt distant, unreal. My gate, my house, my safe place. Someone I had never met had walked onto my property like he belonged there. Then what? I whispered. Ryan's voice dropped. He went to your front door. I covered my mouth. He tried the handle. Tears instantly filled my eyes. My mind refused to process what I was hearing. He didn't get inside, Ryan said quickly. The door held. But somehow that didn't make me feel better, because it meant he had intended to, Ryan continued. After that, he stood on the porch for several minutes. Doing what? Looking through the windows. The image made my stomach turn. I imagined my dark living room, my family photographs, my husband's old chair, a stranger standing outside, studying everything, waiting, planning, watching. The thought made me physically sick. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Ryan looked directly at me. Because I wasn't about to drop you off there tonight. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Everything I had ignored suddenly came rushing back. The missing notepad, the open gate, the man beneath the street lamp, the blue sedan. None of it had been random. Someone had been watching me, for weeks, maybe longer. Then a terrifying realization hit me. What if he thinks I have something? Ryan nodded slowly. I think that's exactly what he believes. The archive files, the missing records, the altered documents. Victor wasn't just interested in me. He was interested in what I might know, or what evidence I might have found. And if he believed I had proof hidden somewhere inside my house, my blood ran cold. Because tonight wasn't just about surveillance anymore. Tonight, someone had gone looking for answers. And if I had arrived home on schedule, I might have walked right into him. Ryan started the car. His face was pale. We need to go to the police. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded. Because for the first time since my husband's death, I wasn't worried about losing my job. I wasn't worried about money. I wasn't worried about being alone. I was worried about surviving. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I thought the police would finally explain who Victor Hale was. Instead, I was about to learn something far worse. He wasn't a stranger connected to my work. Somehow, he was connected to my past. The police station was nearly empty when we arrived. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof as Ryan and I hurried inside. The bright fluorescent lights felt harsh after the darkness outside. For the first time all night, I thought I could finally breathe. I was wrong. A uniformed officer listened carefully as we explained everything. The missing files, the strange behavior, the recordings, the man outside my house. Ryan handed over his notes and audio recordings. At first, the officer remained expressionless. Then he played one of the recordings. Everything changed. His eyes narrowed. He stopped the audio halfway through and stood up. Wait here. The words instantly made me nervous. Minutes later, he returned with a detective who appeared to be in his 60s. Gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that looked like it had seen every possible version of human deception. The detective introduced himself and sat down across from us. Then he listened to every recording, every note, every detail. When he finished, the room became quiet. Finally, he folded his hands. I think you were right to come here tonight. My stomach tightened. You know who he is? The detective nodded. Victor Hale. The name sounded even colder now. Who is he? I asked. The detective exchanged a glance with the officer. Then he answered. For the last several years, Victor has worked private security contracts. I frowned. What does that mean? It means he had access. My confusion deepened. Access to what? The detective slid a folder across the table. Several facilities connected to legal record storage. The words hit me immediately. My archive. My chest tightened. You're saying he had access to the building? Limited access. The detective nodded, but enough to move around without attracting attention. The room suddenly felt smaller. Every strange document, every altered record, every missing file, it all started making sense. He didn't have to break in, I whispered. Exactly. The detective leaned forward. He already had legitimate reasons to be there. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the detective opened another file. Inside was an old photograph. A group of men standing on courthouse steps years earlier. At first, I didn't understand why he was showing it to me. Then my eyes landed on a familiar face. My breath caught. No! There, smiling beside several other men, stood my husband. Michael, younger, healthier, alive. The sight alone nearly brought tears to my eyes. But it wasn't Michael that terrified me. It was the man standing next to him, Victor Hale. The room seemed to tilt. My pulse thundered. What is this? The detective's expression darkened. 20 years ago, your husband testified during a civil fraud investigation. I stared at him. What does that have to do with Victor? The detective didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Your husband helped expose a contractor fraud scheme. My stomach dropped. And Victor, he was one of the people involved. I felt completely numb. The detective continued. After the investigation, Victor lost contracts, licenses, and business opportunities. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't only about missing files. It wasn't only about money. This wasn't random. Somehow, the past had found its way back into my life, and Victor had never forgotten. The detective slowly closed the folder. At first, he was interested in your work. My hands trembled. But when he realized who your husband was, he paused. The silence was unbearable. What happened? I whispered. The detective met my eyes. You became more than a witness. A cold fear spread through my chest. Then what did I become? The detective's answer changed everything. A target. As officers rushed out of the station to execute a warrant, none of us knew what they were about to find inside Victor Hale's property. A discovery that would reveal just how close I had come to disappearing forever. The next few hours felt like a blur. The police station suddenly came alive with activity. Officers moved quickly through hallways. Phones rang non-stop. Radios crackled with updates I couldn't fully understand. Ryan stayed beside me the entire time. Neither of us spoke much. There was nothing left to say. Everything now depended on what investigators would find. Around 3 hours later, the detective returned. The moment I saw his face, I knew they had found something. A lot of something. He closed the office door behind him and sat down. For several seconds, he simply looked at me. Then he exhaled slowly. We executed the warrant. My stomach tightened. And? The detective opened a folder. What we found was worse than we expected. The room became completely silent. He slid several photographs across the table. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Boxes, folders, stacks of paperwork. Then I noticed the labels. Legal case files, hundreds of them. Some were originals, others were altered copies. Investigators had discovered an entire collection of manipulated documents hidden inside Victor's garage and a rented storage unit across town. My hands started shaking. He really did it. The detective nodded. For years. According to the evidence, settlement records had been quietly altered. Payments had been redirected. Amounts had been changed. Small percentages taken from people who would be least likely to notice. Elderly victims, injured workers, families already struggling financially. The fraud stretched back much further than anyone imagined, and the amount stolen was staggering. I felt sick. All those people, all those lives. Then the detective slid another photograph toward me. My blood instantly turned cold. It was my house, a color photograph taken from across the street. Another photo showed my front gate. Another showed my backyard fence. Then another, and another. There were dozens. Some taken during the day, others at night. Some close enough to show details of my windows. I couldn't breathe. He was watching me this entire time. The detective nodded. For months. Tears burned behind my eyes. Then I noticed a notebook sitting beside the photographs. What is that? The detective's expression hardened. His surveillance log. I felt physically ill. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, my work schedule, my typical arrival times, the days I usually bought groceries, the nights my house appeared empty. Every routine I thought nobody noticed had been carefully documented. I felt exposed, like my entire life had been stolen. Then the detective turned to the final page. His face grew serious. There's one more thing. The room suddenly felt colder. He rotated the notebook toward me. A single entry had been circled in red ink. My name, my address, and a date. Tonight, the breath left my lungs. What does that mean? The detective answered quietly. We believe he intended to confront you. My heart pounded. Confront me? Search your house. The detective paused. Possibly intimidate you. Ryan's jaw clenched. And if she resisted? The detective didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The silence told me everything. For the first time, the full reality hit me. If Ryan had driven me home as usual, if he hadn't paid attention, if he had ignored those conversations, I might have walked into my house and never walked back out. And as terrifying as that realization was, an even bigger shock was waiting. Because investigators were about to uncover proof that Victor hadn't been acting alone. The next morning, a federal investigator walked into the station with new evidence, and the names he revealed would expose a corruption scheme far larger than any of us had imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Even though Victor Hale was in custody, my mind refused to slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the photographs, my house, my front door, my daily routine written inside that notebook like I was some kind of project he had been studying. The thought made my skin crawl. Shortly after sunrise, a federal investigator arrived at the station. He carried several thick folders under one arm. The expression on his face immediately told me this case had become much bigger than anyone initially believed. Ryan and I sat quietly while the detective briefed him on everything that had happened. When they finished, the investigator opened one of the folders. "What you're looking at now isn't a single suspect investigation," he said. "It's an organized fraud operation." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" The investigator spread several documents across the table. Bank transfers, corporate records, financial statements. Most of it looked like another language to me. But one thing was obvious. There were multiple names involved, not just Victor's. For years, money had been quietly siphoned from legal settlements meant for vulnerable people. The scheme was carefully designed. Each theft was small enough to avoid attention. A few $100s here, a few thousand there. Nothing large enough to trigger immediate audits. But over time, those amounts became enormous. Millions of dollars had disappeared. The investigator pointed to several shell companies, fake businesses created solely to move money. Every trail eventually led back to a small group of people who had access to legal records. Some worked in records management. Others handled financial processing. A few had security access. Victor was one piece of a much larger machine. But unlike the others, he had become reckless, greedy, careless, and that carelessness ultimately exposed everyone. "Why didn't they stop him?" I asked. The investigator sighed. "Because Victor knew too much." The answer sent a chill through me. The detective nodded. "We believe some members of the group wanted out years ago. But Victor kept going." The investigator agreed. He believed he was untouchable. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the investigator turned toward me. "Your audit changed everything." I blinked. "My audit?" He nodded. "You were connecting patterns nobody else noticed." A strange feeling washed over me. For months, I had doubted myself, questioned every discrepancy, wondered if I was imagining problems. But I wasn't. The records had been speaking the truth all along. Someone simply hoped nobody would listen. The investigator continued. "Once Victor realized you were finding connections, he panicked." That word stuck with me. Panicked. Not angry, not curious, panicked. Because for the first time, I understood something important. Victor wasn't hunting me because I had evidence. He was hunting me because he feared I would eventually find it. The difference mattered, a lot. By the end of the day, search warrants were executed across multiple locations. More arrests followed. Additional evidence surfaced. And with every new discovery, the case grew larger. Yet despite all that progress, one question continued haunting me. Why had Ryan cared enough to get involved? Most people would have ignored strange conversations. Most people would have driven home and forgotten everything. But Ryan hadn't. And before this story ended, I finally asked him why. The answer would become the most emotional moment of this entire ordeal. That evening, after the investigators left, Ryan told me a story from his own past. A story that explained why he refused to ignore the warning signs and why he was determined to save a stranger he barely knew. A few weeks later, the world finally began to slow down. Victor Hale remained in custody. Additional arrests followed. The investigation continued expanding as prosecutors built their case against everyone involved in the fraud scheme. For the first time in months, I wasn't spending every day looking over my shoulder. But that didn't mean life returned to normal. Some things never do. I was temporarily relocated while investigators completed their work. My house no longer felt like home. Every room reminded me of what could have happened. Every window made me wonder how many times someone had been watching from outside. The fear faded slowly, much slower than I expected. One afternoon, after another long meeting with investigators, Ryan and I sat together in a small coffee shop near the courthouse. The trial was still months away. For once, neither of us was talking about evidence, records, or Victor. We simply sat in comfortable silence. Then I asked the question that had been on my mind for weeks. "Why did you help me?" Ryan looked down at his coffee. For a moment, I wasn't sure he would answer. Finally, he spoke. "Because years ago, nobody helped my sister." I felt my chest tighten. Ryan stared out the window. "When I was younger, my sister reported financial fraud at the company where she worked." He paused. At first, nobody believed her. The sadness in his voice was impossible to miss. People told her she was imagining things, that she was overreacting. I remained silent. Then the threats started. My stomach dropped. Ryan continued. "She kept reporting what she found. She kept speaking up." "What happened?" His eyes lowered. "One night she disappeared." The words hit me like a punch. "She was found 2 days later." The pain in his face said everything before he spoke another word. The people responsible were eventually caught, but by then it was too late. Silence settled between us. For the first time I understood. Ryan hadn't ignored Victor because he couldn't. He had seen the warning signs before. He had lived through what happens when nobody listens. "When I heard Victor talking about you," he said quietly, "I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistake twice." Tears filled my eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." Ryan smiled softly. "You don't owe me anything." But he was wrong. I owed him my life. Months later, Victor Hale was convicted alongside several members of the fraud network. Millions of dollars were recovered. Dozens of victims finally received justice. As for me, I eventually returned home. I repaired the gate, changed the locks, planted new flowers in the front yard. Slowly, life moved forward. Not because the fear disappeared, but because I refused to let fear decide how the rest of my story would be written. Sometimes people ask me what I learned from all of this. The answer is simple. Evil often survives because good people convince themselves someone else will act. One person paid attention. One person spoke up. One person refused to look away. And because of that, I'm still here to tell this story. If Ryan had ignored those conversations, if he had driven past my house that night without stopping, or if he had simply decided it wasn't his problem, you would never be hearing these words. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't family, a friend, or someone you've known for years. Sometimes it's a stranger who chooses to care.